To say that Secret of Mana is anything less than a legendary title, an absolute classic, would be doing gaming itself a disservice. With amazing sprite work, a fascinating development, 3-player co-op, and one of the most beautiful soundtracks ever made, you would think that this masterpiece would be an easy recommendation for everyone. But you'd be wrong. Released for the SNES in 1993 by Squaresoft, now Square Enix, Secret of Mana isn't the typical turn-based venture that the company built its reputation on. Though, funny enough, it originally started development as Final Fantasy IV, before someone took a look at it and went, you know, maybe the action RPG route really isn't in line for the Final Fantasy franchise. Something they, really stuck to their guns with. Best described as, hey, you got your Zelda in my Final Fantasy. Secret of Mana, also known as Senken Densetsu in Japan, is a very, let's just go with unique action RPG, with arguably its biggest claim to fame being the co-op. 3-player co-op no less. Quick, break out the multi-tap. Though, not right away. Listen up if you don't want to be confused. And have no fear, being an RPG, I will not be spoiling the story beyond the very beginning. Feel free to check out my long play channel if you're really that hankering for spoilers. Though, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that, while both goofy at times and surprisingly dark at others, story-wise, Secret of Mana is technically incomplete. Originally codenamed Chrono Trigger, yeah, seriously, and intended as a launch title for the SNES CD Add-on, which, considering the timeline we live in, I don't like thinking about it, clearly didn't happen. Secret of Mana actually ended up having roughly 40% of what was originally intended cut in order to fit your standard SNES cart. A real shame, but hey, bright side, at least it didn't go down with the ship. Because seriously, losing a soundtrack that is on par with Final Fantasy VI to the sands of time would just make the world that much darker. From upbeat tunes that are as catchy as they are quirky, to menacing scores that make the air feel thick, and even gut-wrenching melodies that could bring a tear to the eye, the music in Secret of Mana runs the gambit and is just plain fantastic. And I think Square knew it too. Really does say something when the composer gets higher billing than the director. So, after naming our hero, who, like the rest of the cast, don't actually have default names in the English version, our tale begins with our chosen hero showing off his skills and grace, as he stumbles upon the sacred mana sword embedded in the stone. After putting King Arthur to shame, the game has officially kicked off. But aren't we missing something? Fear not, you didn't set the game up wrong or miss any options. Secret of Mana actually starts out single-playered, with its main focus being on the story. Our hero hasn't met his traveling companions yet, so your buddies are gonna have to sit back and chill for roughly an hour before they can actually join the fray. But hey, it's an old school RPG, that's really not much in the grand scheme of things. So, after heading back home and risking your life fighting a giant mantis monster, you are heralded as the great hero. Just kidding, they actually boot you out on your ass. Turns out that everyone is pretty pissed off that you pulled out the mana sword and basically doomed them all. Oops. It happens. So it's time to hit the road, see the sights, and maybe even save the world. So it's off to the Water Temple for a bit of an exposition dump about a giant floating fortress of death, a sacred beast that will destroy the world, and the journey that you have to make to all of the sacred temples across the land in order to stop them. Though not before a nice, well-earned, relaxing dip. Now there are technically two paths you can take at this point. One where you help out the girl, and the other where you follow the main quest. You know, saving the world. Okay, just hear me out. Actually, it's a lot smarter to pick the main path, as that is so much easier and will net you a lot more gear. Plus, getting Sprite Child into your party will be a major help for when you do join up with the girl's quest midway as your next stop. Rescue her from a bad Twilight fanfic, and Ta-da! You have 3-player co-op available, and a simple press of the start button will let them easily pop in and out without ever breaking the flow. Seriously, why is that feature so rare in games? Now, I have played Secret of Mana so many times throughout my life with different people, different numbers, different ages, and I've got to see a variety of responses to the gameplay and how it works. So, this is definitely where I expect to start losing players. Big time. Be it to confusion or frustration, to answer that question of why I can't recommend an absolute classic like Secret of Mana to everyone is, to be blunt, this is not a game for newbies. If you don't have any experience with the genre, or older games and their not so polished mechanics, or just don't have the patience for games lacking quality of life features, you're probably not going to have the best of times. And that's whether you're playing solo or co-op, and sometimes even in spite of the co-op. So, think you can handle it? We're going to start out with the basics of combat, which, like most of the game, is deceptively simple at first glance. And I know what you're thinking. Top-down view, sword-swinging action? Looks very similar to A Link to the Past. But believe me, it is very different. While just going in there swinging your sword around like a madman won't result in your death, it certainly might result in some brain damage as you rip your own hair out in frustration. When you find out, you're not doing any damage. Taking a quick glance at the bottom here, you'll notice this bar below your health. Now, if we just do this... there we go. Basically, it's a pseudo ATB meter. Or, in other words, you have to wait until the meter reaches 100% if you want to do any real damage when you attack. Interestingly enough, its modern day equivalent would be fighting in Minecraft of all things. Yeah, go figure. Now, that's not to say that if you attack with less than 100% it won't do any damage, but trust me, it won't be much. So button mashing without waiting will mostly be a waste. Though, if you're clever, it can be used strategically. Batting foes away or holding them in place for your partners to launch their assaults, usually with a charge attack, is a pretty good strategy. Assuming, of course, you can land a hit at all. And that's mostly due to the graphics, which, aside from some glitching here and there, can be, let's just say, misleading. Particularly in the combats. Not helped by the fact that it isn't a game I'd exactly call forthcoming with its nuanced mechanics. Though, ignoring that for just a moment, Secret of Mana is an absolutely beautiful game. Easily one of the best of its time. It's bright and colorful and still looks fantastic even today. The characters are fun, wacky, and expressive, and the animations, particularly the charge attacks, are badass. And the environments have an incredible range to them, with the Crystal Forest being especially breathtaking. This is the first game ever that really made me feel like there is an entire world in this cartridge. And not to mention, there's also a fun and clever use of Mode 7. But let's get back to the fighting. Your stats, which are tucked away within a menu, will definitely help to paint a clearer picture here. This game really does lean more into Final Fantasy than it does Zelda. What you, the player, will be witnessing is your characters and foes actively dodging attacks. However, the bosses, the most important fights in the game, won't be. They don't have dodge animations. And while there is sometimes a very light sound cue for failed attacks, let's be real here, it's gonna get annoying fast. It can be genuinely difficult to tell where it is you're supposed to swing to hit these things, or if you're just missing altogether.
Did you miss?
How could I miss?
I don't know, how did you?
I personally never understood this until I played the remake, where they actually added in the words miss when I failed to land a hit, even though I'm clearly landing said hit. Still though, dodging around, charging attacks, waiting for that perfect moment to strike can really be exhilarating, especially as a group versus one giant Goliath. But showing monsters the pointy end of your blade is only the tip of the iceberg, as the only way to truly master a Mana game is to master a staple of the franchise, the ring menu. Unlike the menus that you're probably more familiar with in most games, not just JRPGs, where it takes up the entire screen, the ring menu system feels like it's really trying to take a more streamlined approach to that classic formula, but in doing so takes a bit more getting used to, despite it being a major fixture in the game. that you use for pretty much everything. From swapping weapons, casting magic, using items, and even looking at your stats. It's all here. And if you are looking at your stats, there's menus within menus. This is also the game's pause feature, so expect that to happen a lot, especially as a group, which will inevitably break up momentum. But the really important thing here that you really need to be aware of is that the menu is specific to the character using it. And yes, I get it, that sounds obvious, but here's the thing. If you want to equip something to a character, have a specific character use an item or magic, they need to be the one doing it from their menu, which includes computer-controlled players if you don't have a full party of humans.
Okay, we get it.
Pro tip, each character can have custom settings for how they should act when being controlled by the computer. From getting up in the enemy's face to keeping their distance. And while trust me, they will get annoyingly stuck on walls and enemies as you venture forth, being able to tell them to hang back or go on the offense during boss fights can be super helpful. And this can be edited at any time, even during said boss fights, so make sure you take full advantage of it. As you can hopefully see by now, there's a lot more to the combat than meets the eye, and I didn't even go over any of the weapons, unique magic effects, or leveling. And while it all works in conjunction to create a fun and rewarding combat system, it still has some major jank and difficulty spikes that will most certainly be getting in the way and will probably weed out a majority of the players with less patience, and those who are not really used to the challenges of the time. And to be fair, we're not just talking about some small things here. Prepare to set some records as you go from kicking ass to dead almost instantly, as certain enemies can, and trust me, they will, be stun locking your entire team. It is an obnoxious way to go. Though, to be fair, you can do the same to them. Though there are just way too many enemies with high evasion rates that constantly multiply, and it is annoying as hell. Which is not helped by the fact that MP is pretty limited, so you'll probably be using magic pretty sparingly, mostly at the bosses. But, as you would expect, there are basic foes that can only be hit by it. And the thing about magic is, it does not miss. Unless you glitch it. And speaking of, sometimes, not that often, but it can happen, commands, they just don't happen, like healing or using an item. Which can be really problematic, because it only seems like it happens when you really need it to. But what I would put at the top as the only true deal breaker is this. There are just some fights that you cannot win if you didn't come properly prepared or powered up for. Though you'll never see them coming and end up losing a lot of progress. The best example of this has to be this blob at the end of the game, final dungeon no less. It locks you away from the core, so trying to hit it with your weapons is simply out of the question. The only thing that can really do damage to it is dark magic, a magic that you get pretty late game, so you probably won't have used it as much, and thus you wouldn't have powered it up that much. But in order to be effective, it has to be leveled up to at least stage 2 to do any real damage. And if that isn't bad enough, if Sprite Child, the only character who can use attack magic, is KO'd or out of mana, and you can't restore it in any kind of way, well, I think you get the point. It really is a lot. Even if the majority is just a bunch of smaller issues, they add up. So I really wouldn't blame anyone for steering clear of this one. But I'd also argue that it comes with the territory. Secret of Mana set out to do big things, unlike any other game of the time on a system that, let's be real here, probably couldn't handle it all. But despite the setbacks and getting crunched down, it accomplished a lot of what it set out to do. It's impressive. While this game can certainly be cheap, frustrating, and even head-scratching at times, there is a reason this game is considered an absolute classic beyond just its impressive visuals and touching music. For me, this game represents what an adventure in gaming should be. Fun, challenging, strategic, fulfilling, action-packed, and can be cheesed in just the right ways. And of course, it is best experienced with friends. If you can break through the rough of the era, trust me, you will find yourself rewarded with a diamond.